Okay, Susan, I'm on.
Okay, sir, you can go ahead. We are live now.
Okay, tribute to our mentor, our great teacher. Giving and giving. Dr. E gave of himself. Like a library, he shares his rich collection. A teacher of teachers, he fortified the pillars of the citadel. Like an open book, he encouraged enlightenment. Like a mirror, he reflected the light. Giving and giving, Dr. E gave of himself to all who crossed his path. Dr. E gave his all. There are many lecturers, but few teachers. Teachers with the gift of simplification to make learning full of fun and joy. Teachers whose reward is truly in heaven. Dr. E was a gifted teacher of teachers. Now, as we know, this was a tribute to him, July 12, 2018, when we had this kind of program. I would like to show some of his commitments to higher education. This is a photo exhibition. Here, he was giving a lecture in the University of Port Harcourt. And this is Emerald Energy Institute in the University of Port Harcourt, which he built and endowed to the university. This institute has trained many scholars working in industry and academia. Through him, we invited Professor Wumi Ledare to be the director of this institute, and the institute has made its mark. This is endowment in the University of Ibadan, Emmanuel Egbogah Center of Petroleum Engineering in the University of Ibadan, where incidentally was a pioneer lecturer in this country in petroleum engineering. This is a project he endowed in his secondary school, in his alma mater. This is a picture with the 6th Vice Chancellor, and on this left-hand side of the Vice Chancellor is Kanayo O Kanayo, one of the Nollywood stars in Nigeria, who was present on that occasion. Here is Dr. E with Amos Noor. Amos Noor is a professor at Stanford University who came with Dr. E in most of the lectures. It was indeed an international legacy lecture series. And here is Dr. E with Professor Wumi Ledare, the director of the Emerald Energy Institute, and with Mrs. Egbogah. It was a very happy occasion in which we also celebrated his birthday in the university. And here is a very important photograph where Dr. E was advocating for Africa with the Black Caucus in the United States. And this is one of the very important landmarks, Abuja Petroleum Roundtable. And here he was with the Senate President at the time, Right Honorable Ken Nnamani. This is also part of the event with Jude Amefule in the Abuja Petroleum Roundtable in 2014. And this is part of the UI project he endowed. This is the one in his alma mater, no, in the community secondary school, in his community, he endowed. And this photograph is very important. It's in black and white. Very important in the sense that it is the first Dr. E was the first expert in residence in Nigeria. We used to have writers in residence, but this is the occasion where he was the expert in residence speaking to graduate students on how they could apply themselves in the oil and gas industry. So these are some photographs. This particular comment is very important. An Iroko begets many Irokos before disappearing. Dr. E trained some of the professors of petroleum engineering in the country. In fact, most of them were his proteges. And so we like to use the occasion once again in celebrating the 9th Emmanuel Egbogah Legacy Lecture Series to celebrate the man, a great Nigerian, a mentor of many scholars. He was a presidential advisor on petroleum matters to President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua, Federal Republic of Nigeria. He was a member of the National Economic Management Team, chairman of the governing board, Nigerian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. He served as African Union Peace Ambassador to Sudan in the role of chairman, Petroleum Monitoring Committee, responsible for the implementation of the agreements in oil and related economic matters between the Republic of Sudan and the Republic of South Sudan. He was the technical advisor and technology custodian for the Malaysian oil and gas company Petronas. Before then, he was also the advisor to the oil and gas company in Libya. Now, in the area of higher education, he was more like the pro-chancellor, Bells University, just before his demise. He invested so much in higher education, Emerald Energy Institute, University of Port Harcourt, the Biofuel Laboratory in the University of Port Harcourt, the Emmanuel Egbogah Building, University of Ibadan, Abuja Petroleum Roundtable, the Roundtable in the Nnamdi Azikiwe University to discuss the budget. He also made endowments in Bells University of Technology, Ota, Federal University of Technology, Owerri, Lagos State University in Lagos. Indeed, his contribution to higher education is part of the legacy we are celebrating. Thank you very much. So
thank you very much, Honorable Vice Chancellor. I want to welcome you again to this 9th Emmanuel Egbogah Legacy Lecture Series. Let me stand on existing protocol that permit me to give special recognition to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Acting Vice Chancellor of the University of Port Harcourt, Professor Okududu Stephen. Thank you very much for coming. And let me also recognize who's an audio device, the matriarch of the Emmanuel Egbogah Foundation, Mrs. Chiruta Ngozi Egbogah. Thank you, Madam, for joining us in Canada. Welcome you. Let me also recognize the keynote speaker today, the 2019 Society of Petroleum Engineers International President, Dr. Sami, who is joining us from Saudi Arabia. He's going to be our keynote speaker. I also want to welcome all the panelists, Madam Pat, Professor Ekwekwe, and Engineer Chikezi from ADAX, Nwosu from ADAX. Just sort of word in the person we're celebrating today, and we've done it now. This is our 9th lecture series. We endow so many things as listed by Professor Ajenka. In fact, Professor Ajenka is the current chair, Emmanuel Egbogah Chair in Petroleum Engineering at the University of Port Harcourt. And my name is Wumi Ledari. I'm the distinguished professor endowed by Chiruta and Emmanuel Egbogah, even though I'm currently the GMPC chair in the University of Cape Coast in petroleum economics. So I want to welcome you and permit me to invite the Vice Chancellor, Mrs. Emmanuel Egbogah wanted to give a quick opening remark, but we try to connect her. I hope before the end of the program, she'll be able to connect and then be able to join. We are working on that. So that's going to give you a brief remark. Meanwhile, I would like to invite Professor Steve Okududu to give us the chairman's remark. Welcome, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir.
All right, thank you very much, Wumi. I believe that you can hear me. Loud and clear. Audio okay? Is the audio okay there? Can you hear me now?
Yes, please. Yes,
all
sir.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Let me start by thanking the organizers of this legacy lecture. From the record here, this is the 9th in the series. For me, it shows commitment on the part of those behind it. And to say that one couldn't have expected more, less, because Dr. E, as is popularly known, is one of the most profound beneficiaries of the University of Port Harcourt. And for every time we have occasion, to celebrate him, we find it something of immense opportunity for us as a university. And so I do not want to take more of your time because I know that the guest lecturers, Dr. Sami, is also, itching to go and make his presentation. But let me also dwell on the theme of this presentation, sustainable development and prosperity for humanity, the role of petroleum in the post-COVID-19 era. I think the theme is also timely because I was just at one of the conferences this morning, and the conversation around sustainable development is one that has become of very global significance, particularly given that much of what had answered to the despoilation of the Niger Delta and the world, and which also had left profound carbon footprints, is exactly what comes out of the petroleum industry. And so I find this theme quite, very, very topical. And I'm sure that the guest lecturer will be, spending more time, not just in terms of telling us, about sustainable development and prosperity for humanity, but what needs to be done in the circumstance in mitigating, particularly in this era that we're talking of green energy. The sustainability of our earth is something that is pivotal for the sustenance of earth resources. As we say in development, the earth resources is not a resource we inherited from our ancestors, but a resource we hold in trust for future generations. I guess that it is in that context that this theme is also very topical. I want to welcome all of us on behalf of the University of Port Harcourt, staff and students, to this 9th Emmanuel Egbogah Legacy Lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We then take the honor to invite the keynote speaker today, Dr. Sam Al-Nuan, is the immediate past president of the Society of Petroleum Engineers International. He has been with Saudi Aramco for over 30 years, and he has worked as a reservoir engineer, production engineer, and he also worked in research and development. He currently leads the Upstream Computer Center. What he loves the most is transferring knowledge. He takes pride in being an affiliate professor of petroleum engineering to the King Fahad University, King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia. He's got his degree from King Fahad University, where he's currently an affiliate professor of petroleum engineering, and his doctor of philosophy from the University of Texas at Austin, the Longhorns. What I like about him is his emphasis about sustainable development. And that's some of what I call the noble characteristics of a benefactor, Dr. E. The mantra from Dr. E is prosperity without posterity in view is inconsequential. So when President Sami was leading the SP International, he wore the cap of the importance of petroleum for sustainable development globally. He's particularly passionate about how petroleum could be used to develop Africa. And I remember when he came to Nigeria, he emphasized that. So please permit me to welcome the 2019 Society of Petroleum Engineers President, Sami Adnoam, to take the podium and speak on the topic today, the role of petroleum in human prosperity and sustainable development. Thank you. The podium is yours, sir.
Thank you, Moby. Thank you very much. Let me share my slides just to make sure that it's working very well, because we rely heavily on technology nowadays. Can you see the slides?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Ar-Rahman Rahim. Thank you, Moby, again for this introduction. Good afternoon to all. Dear friends, SP members and guests, I would like, I would have been really more delighted addressing you today face-to-face in Lagos. Unfortunately, as you all know, we were forced to accept what we call today the new norm, which is around the virtual communication, which is taking place in most, if not all, SP events as well. I must also admit that I was so lucky meeting most of you last year when I visited Lagos. I had enjoyed not only the beautiful city of Lagos and its hospitality as well, but also, most importantly, the generosity and kindness of Nigerian people, including, of course, its petroleum engineers. I would like to thank the organizing committee for selecting me to participate in this important event. The title of my talk today is Sustainable Development and Human Prosperity, the Role of Petroleum in the Post-COVID-19 Era. Those of you who followed SPE events in the last few years, I would say, will recognize that sustainability was indeed the cornerstone of most SPE major events globally. Indeed, it was the focus of my talks around the world. We basically wanted to tell and show the world that oil and gas can be sustainable, reliable, and affordable source of energy to power the global economy and improve the human prosperity, and improve the human prosperity with best-in-class social development as well as environmental protection. This is our mission pre, during, and post-COVID-19. As a matter of fact, COVID-19 is proving it as we speak. This is what we advocate in SPE. This is what we're telling the world. If we look at the role that petroleum played in the last, I would say, century, you can see the direct impact of the products that we produce, oil and gas, where on the human prosperity and its economy, as well as social life. Oil and gas today, as you all know, contribute almost between 53 and 55% of the global energy mix, and can directly be linked to all aspects of human prosperity, including, of course, all the 17 United Nations Social Development Goals. The direct impact of that is very clear in this chart that shows in the right-hand side clearly the direct proportional link between global energy use as well as the United Nations Human Development Index, or what's called HDI. Let's not forget that oil and gas energy sources had the lion's share in the energy mix during this period. A good example of human prosperity in the last few decades is the global spread of mobile cellular subscriptions, as indicated in this slide, where the 2019 United Nations Human Development Report shows a positive change in the last 10 years in the low and medium income classes. The positive change under these two categories are almost 50% increase in the low income class and 60% in the medium income class when it comes to the cellular subscription. The report also indicated that the 21st century has witnessed great progress in living standards, with an unprecedented number of people around the world making a great escape from hunger, disease, and poverty. The HDI shows impressive improvement on average, reflecting dramatic improvements, end of quotes. The global economy and human prosperity were moving in the right direction in what we call today pre-COVID-19 era, where most of the forecasts indicated that the global energy demand will increase by 1/3 by 2040, led, of course, as expected by oil and gas, where the oil will increase by 15% and gas 25%. But the combination of both oil and gas by 2040 will maintain its lion's share in the energy mix above 50%. The world population also, as being reported by many forecasts, will grow by 1.7 billion people, half of them, by the way, to be born in Africa, the lowest continent when it comes to energy access. Those forecasts show also the necessity for the global economy to offset the depreciation and the inflation by the necessity to double its GDP by 2040. And also the United Nations Social Development Goals number 7, which clearly indicate the plan, or at least I would say the goal, for it to reach 0 by 2030. And I cannot imagine for the world not to achieve those aggressive goals, but even to come close to it without oil and gas. I believe that you all agree with me that the oil and gas industry was in the right direction to address all of these demands and goals, aggressive goals, through major investments in the upstream, midstream, and downstream, and was close to recover from the 2014 and 2015 downturn, especially after the formation of what is called OPEC+, where major OPEC and non-OPEC oil producers created a platform to collaborate to establish more stable oil market to improve eventually the oil prices. The challenges we were aware of and are dealing with as we speak before the COVID-19 are technical, geopolitical, economical, environmental, which is big topic, which is a big topic related to sustainability, and definitely the cyber also, which is also a critical challenge to address. Our industry have unmatched record to address the technical challenge by successfully investing in the upstream sector of our business and successfully increasing its oil and gas reserves, as illustrated in this pie chart, by 35% in the oil and 50% in gas. This is, of course, in addition to replacing what we have produced in the last 20 years. This great achievement is only in the last 2 decades. So we added almost 50% gas reserves and replaced what we have produced. And we've added additional 35% in the oil reserves in addition to replacing what we have produced. We also started to aggressively put plan to address the environmental big challenge, as you can see listed in this slide, by implementing several strategies that would drive the oil and gas industry towards the long-term objective of what we call near zero carbon and methane emission. Initiatives such as availing more gas to power to replace coal, investing in renewables in power, investing in energy efficiency, investing in carbon capture and sequestration for EOR, the crude to chemical initiatives and programs, the oil and gas climate initiative, where 13 major oil and gas companies invest almost $1 billion to develop technologies to accelerate this energy transition. And last but not least, the carbon circular economy that was announced by several major oil countries, especially under the leadership of Saudi Arabia. The 2020 will be remembered to be the year of surprises to all of us, where we added the pandemic as a major threat, not only to oil and gas industry, as we saw clearly, but rather to human existence on Earth. No one had the intelligence to predict the implication of COVID-19 as we saw it, unfortunately. Sometimes when you stop for a while and think about what have happened so far, you see really the global picture to be quite dark. The challenge of this virus, not only the virus itself, but the speed of its spread and the geographical spread of its implication. In less than 9 months, more than 28 million people got affected and close to 1 million people sadly lost their life. Human prosperity, technology advancement, and strong social life and ties that we were proud of before, unfortunately helped spreading this tragedy. Who could have imagined that 4.2 billion people around the world got affected by partial social lockdown in less than 3 months of the first case? This is almost 60% of the global GDP. 1 month later, all global population got affected somehow by this partial lockdown. The world pre-COVID was under energy appetite. Hence, once the social lockdown started, energy demand dropped dramatically, as you can see in this slide. The full year energy demand is expected to decline by 6%. This is equivalent to 2019 energy demand of France, Germany, Italy, and UK combined, and is 7 times the impact of the 2008 financial crisis that caused the oil to drop to close to $25. In April, almost 50% of the global primary energy demand was affected. The decline magnitude has no precedent in the last 70 years. Imagine. As you all can see, oil got the largest hit among all other sources of energy, since it is more related to mobility and transportation sector. Forecasts predict its decline to reach 9% as compared to the 2019. If you add the previously projected slight increase in 2020, this is closed to 11 to 13%. If we zoom into oil, we see the increasing decline in oil demand since the outbreak of this pandemic. During the first quarter, oil dropped 5%, as you can see in the left-hand side, followed by 23% in the second quarter. This study was done in June 2020, with projected improvement in the second half of the year, with the assumption of the availability of vaccination. Although during the second half of 2020, several countries relaxed their social lockdown, we saw second virus spread wave in several countries, leading to projected oil demand drop of 8%. The 9% average annual oil demand could reach 13% as well. What made this even worse, not only the demand drop, but also the price drop, including the historical, what we call free fall of West Texas Intermediate in April. I personally expect oil revenues lost globally to reach close to $1 trillion by the year end. And I'm saying it sadly. These two charts tell the whole story of oil demand drop, because almost 80% of the oil of the barrel is consumed by transportation sector, which got the biggest hit in its recent history in both aviation, light vehicle, and public transport. The global vehicles are basically losing 50%. When you look at the vehicle use on road, almost lost 50%, whereas aviation lost 50%. The negative implication of this double drop to the short, mid, and long-term future of oil and gas industry is yet to be quantified. These are some estimates of potential implication on energy investment. As you can see in this slide, before COVID-19, 2020 investment in the energy sector was quite high, as you see it in the slide. After COVID-19, it got almost 20% lost, almost $370 billion lost in the 2020 energy investment. The split is as illustrated in this. The biggest hit, basically, as you can see, in the shale oil, followed by the power, followed by the energy efficiency, and last by coal. Of course, conventional oil and gas is not known as we speak today, because unfortunately, I don't have the data. The data is not published. As I said, the industry was, this study was conducted by IEA in June 2020. My expectation for the investment to drop more by year end. Because of the long-term nature of our business, we will see the impact of this drop, not next year, but rather in the next 3 to 5 years from now. but I expect oil demand gap could exist, which may cause another increase in the oil prices. The worst implication of this pandemic is not the economy. It is not the money that we lost. The worst impact of this loss is our valuable skilled human resources, not only in the oil and gas industry, but in all industries at large, with the exception, of course, the medical industry. Indeed, it has been the worst year in recent history where people lost their jobs. The good thing that I must mention here is the effort by some governments to provide incentives for companies to keep their employees. Unfortunately, not all governments did so, and those who did could not cover all industries as we speak. Before I talk about our industry's response to this threat, I must also say that there was one positive implication of COVID-19 induced by the social lockdown and energy demand drop. This is the low CO2 emission historical record, surpassing any previous decline. The annual CO2 decline is expected to reach unprecedented record of more than 3% and could reach between 4 to 5% by year end. More than twice all previous declines since World War II combined. That's really the only, I would say, the only positive thing that I can see. Now, let's look at how we as industry responded to this threat and helped the world to fight it. I think the first thing that we did in the oil and gas industry is really to protect our people, to provide safe environment for our people to work in, whether in the office or in the field. It's really very important to guarantee the safety of our people, because as you know, the world will still need some energy sources. Although we lost, at the peak, something between 15 to 20 million barrels a day, but the world was still consuming close between 80 to 85 million barrels per day and 100 billions of scuffed of gas. So the safety of our people is priority number one. Ensuring business continuity during this threat, utilizing advanced technologies to provide what we call work remotely for our people who cannot travel and cannot work from office. Mitigating supply chain risk, because as you know, we rely heavily on other industries to provide materials and services. Developing management skills during the crisis. This is something that I think we have realized the importance of basically enhancing and enriching our skills to manage during a crisis. Continuing corporate social responsibility of our industry, which is really very important, because the world today, if the world needed us one time pre-COVID-19, it needs us 3 times or more during COVID-19. Focusing on reliability, safety, environment, and most importantly, cyber threat and energy security, because we all know that the cyber attackers basically get advantage during any chaos or crisis. So it's really very important for us to focus, to make sure that our services, our products reach our customers in a very safe and reliable manner, as well as with the best-in-class environmental practices. And of course, the last but not least, which is very, very important, which really helped us through this journey, is the effective collaboration by non-OPEC and OPEC countries in what is called today OPEC Plus to improve the stability of the oil market and put a balance between supply and demand. I must say here that we as industry must continue to address this threat strongly through a new collaborative model. And let me tell you why. If we look at the global energy intensity, the United Nations global goal is to achieve by 2040 almost 100 gigajoules per head in terms of energy intensity. This chart that you see in front of you shows the advancements of what is called today developed countries in the left-hand side. Their current and future energy intensity as well is quite high and above the 2040 UN goal. It also shows the developing and underdeveloping countries to your right-hand side, of which most of them are not expected even to reach this goal by 2040. Africa, for example, today its energy intensity is only 19 gigajoules per head and will be only 20 gigajoules per head by 2040. If we zoom into Africa, into oil and gas industry in Africa, we see almost the same picture. This is almost 80% short of the United Nations goal, unless we decide to change this future. And I hope we will have people among you today watching this presentation who will change this future for Africa. I am very happy to hear about the new gas discoveries in North and South offshore of Africa. We need to increase our investment in Africa, not only in conventional oil and gas, as we see it today, but rather in unconventional LNG projects, as well as renewables, to basically improve the energy intensity and improve the prosperity in this continent. The question here is, how do we see the future? Are we optimistic? Let me share with you some of my thoughts. In the third quarter, as we see, we saw, some kind of increase in the demand, possibly due to the return of, the social life globally. And several forecasts shows that the return to the original 2020, possibly in Q2 or Q3 2021. My expectation, my personal expectation will be end of Q4 2021. The most importantly, that oil and gas will continue to be the largest, reliable, affordable source of energy. Oil and gas will have the lion's share in the energy mix, as I said, before, during, and after COVID-19. The oil and gas industry also will benefit, I hope, from the expected demand and supply gap that I talked about in the next 3 to 5 years. Price could be high, where I think the oil and gas can make up some of its recent loss. The industry is transforming to what we call today the new norm. And I think this event is a good example, for this new norm. Tapping on IT, skilled young professional members. By the way, as you all know, SPE, we have almost 70,000, maybe 75,000 now, young professionals and university students who really are skilled when it comes to IT and communication technologies. OPEC Plus that I talked about is expected to continue, and we have seen the great effort that was put by the Saudi energy minister, as well as the OPEC General Secretary, and expected to continue in the next future. putting more stability in the oil and gas industry, and helping to keep what we call acceptable oil prices. So this is what I was, basically, our position is very strong, as I said, today and will be in the future. We would like to basically lead the energy industry to redefine the concept of sustainability and redefine the concept of sustainable energy transition as we speak today. We would like to play a major role to make the oil and gas cleaner and more efficient, of course, complemented by renewables, and work hard towards what we call near zero net CO2 and methane emission with a positive economical, social, energy poverty, and most importantly, environmental impacts. That's our definition of sustainable energy transition. The definition today that we see in the literature in relation to energy transition does not meet our demand. It does not meet our definition, because people are trying to get away from oil and gas. And the way that we see it, oil and gas is becoming cleaner, becoming greener, and becoming more important when it comes to providing sustainable energy industry to power the global energy, improve the human prosperity, as enrich its social life. This is what we need to reach. I've spoken several times around the world. I've spoken to several ministers, officials, CEOs around the world, and most of them really talk the same language. We want to reach what I call the sustainable energy balance equation, where you have clean oil and gas, carbon circular economy, and renewables in the left-hand side of the equation, and in the right-hand side of the equation, you will have protecting the environment, enriching its social development, and most importantly, protecting protect the environment itself. This is our endeavor. This is our goal. This is basically what we aim to. And I think the industry is at the right track to start this rough journey. And the question is really not, are we going to achieve it or not? I think based on my experience and talk to several authorities in the oil and gas industry, the global oil and gas industry, the question is not whether we are going to achieve this. The question is when we are achieving this. Is it going to be 2050? Is it going to be 2060 or maybe 2070? I don't know. It's really, unfortunately, I don't have the answer. And my expectation, if we keep the same sustainability momentum in our industry as we speak in the next probably 5 to 10 years, the industry will be able to answer this question, to make a commitment to the world, to provide what we call energy sustainable transition model that would lead to what we call near zero net CO2 and methane emission, or what is called carbon neutral industry. The oil and gas will be the heart of the energy industry. And as I said, let me conclude by saying the oil and gas was the heart of the energy industry pre-COVID-19. It was indeed the heart of the energy industry during COVID-19. and it will be the heart of the energy industry post-COVID-19. With this, I would like to thank again the organizing committee for giving me this opportunity to be with you here today and address this, this audience. And thank you very much. Back to you, Umi.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Really appreciate your presentation of the model and where we are going forward. So certainly, we don't want oil and gas to become like coal in the future. And so the industry will probably continue the line which they are doing their best to make sure that the industry not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk to make the oil and gas industry part of the equation for sustainable energy and humanity prosperity as we go forward. Now, I would like to hand over to the chairman of the panel discussion. Please, Mr. President, kindly wait so that you'll be able to participate in answering questions after the mini roundtable. In fact, you are part of the mini roundtable. Sure, we have some questions that I have where will be posed to you.
Sure,
but to chair, thank you, sir. To chair the mini panel session, expanding on this human prosperity and the role of petroleum, is our own Professor of Political Science and Public Policy, Professor Egbogah. He was actually my deputy director when I was director of EEI, and I got a lot of wisdom from him. He participated in our ability to graduate about 90 MS degree in petroleum and energy economics. He was the pillar and ended up graduating about 20 Doctor of Philosophy over 5 years because of what he did. He's a professor of professors, someone with industry experience, political experience, and academic experience. It's a rare breed. A humble man of all definition, and someone I can call a mentor when it comes to being a good administrator. Let me take this opportunity again to thank you for helping me to land safely in Uniport when I came in 2013. And let me also thank you for being a part of the Emmanuel Egbogah legacy. And I welcome you to chair this session, and you will have the opportunity to introduce the panelists. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ledare. I don't know where to begin. You've made my job very difficult. I thought it was very simple, but thanks very much for those kind remarks. And I also like to thank the keynote speaker for giving us a full dose. His paper was really very rich, and we can look forward in the mini roundtable to building on what he started, so that at the end of it, we would all have a full appreciation of the relationship between the sustainability of humanity and the petroleum industry. And as we all know, this is an area that has excited a lot of debate in the past, the role of energy, but in particular petroleum, in climate change, global sustainability, and so on. And I'm very confident that the panelists here will help us to further understand this issue, and hopefully at the end of the day, there'll be some concrete ideas, possibly policy recommendations that can come from these discussions as we go on. We have two panelists. I understand that Mr. Chikezie Nwosu will be unable to join us, and I am very biased towards women, and I'm glad that we have a lady on the panel, and I'd like to invite her first, if she's ready with us. Ms. Patricia Simon Hart is the Chief Executive Officer of Track Limited. And I'd like to invite you, Madam, to please make your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try and share my slides. In the meantime, I'd just like to thank you for inviting me to present and to be part of this panel discussion and your esteemed list of panelists. So let me go to the beginning. So I think I'll go straight into the topic. And that was an excellent presentation by Dr. Anlulaim. That was excellent. And I think he set the stage and set the pace to show us that really there is no denying that oil and gas has an extremely important place to play in the global economy. And also in emerging economies, it's actually the main driver of economic and social development. And so if we are considering oil and gas as the main driver for social development, then with regards to sustainable development, it has both the positive and the negative impacts. And so even though the narrative, because of the carbon emissions and the greenhouse gas emissions, has been negative, we can see it still has that role to play in human development, prosperity, and especially so for the most vulnerable in society. And so we can't do without it. And so there has to be this balance that we have to play between trying to use oil and gas as a source of energy and also trying to promote the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we need to do this without compromising the environment. And I think that's the tricky balance that the oil sector needs to get right. So energy supply itself really is at the core of our well-being, and it's needed to increase productivity. Without it, national and human development will be impacted negatively. So we need it, and it shall remain that major part of the energy transition and the energy mix that they're looking at, even trying to move towards a net zero economy. All the SDGs are actually impacted positively when we increase availability to energy. And I think it was shown in the keynote presentation that really for Africa and for the underdeveloped or developing or emerging economies, you can see that the utilization is very low, and so it has a lot of capacity to grow, and so more energy will actually be required. But there are challenges, but there are also opportunities, with regards to the SDG targets. So while we need energy to address the challenges and close those gaps, we also have the target of this environmental sustainability that has been impacted negatively by the industry. So we have to find ways that the oil and gas industry can be used, or oil and gas can be used to enhance positive contributions to the SDGs while we mitigate all the negative impacts from the gas emissions and the carbon emissions from the SDGs. So, unfortunately, as we've just heard as well, unfortunately, 2020 was a really bad year for the oil sector, but it was as bad for the SDG goals. It pushed back really a lot of the work done and a lot of the progress towards achieving this 2030 target. And so we can't deny this, the impact on those goals. And I think he's gone on a lot about it, so I won't duplicate what he's already said, but the impact of COVID-19 on the oil sector and on the development sector has been, or sustainable development sector has been pretty substantial. So now really we're going into this like post-COVID kind of era. We're not there, we're not even there yet, because we're hearing lockdowns all over again, the second wave we're hearing. But so was in some quarters, kind of what the crisis experts are calling adaptive recovery phase, while we move towards a resilience phase where we rebuild, resilience into our strategies and our processes. But the stage is set. I mean, there are financial crisis, there's the need for diversification. It's very clear that economies have to diversify. There's need for cheaper oil. We need to reduce the cost of oil, especially for countries like Nigeria, the cost of production of oil. And I think also there needs to be more invested in technology, as we keep on hearing. But this also produced some kind of opportunities as well. This post-COVID era has produced opportunities for governments to rethink their policies, to reevaluate their policies. And we could see this, for the economy, for trade, for business, for society. So that's also ongoing. And we can see this in Nigeria even happening live. I mean, before us, we can see that the government has reevaluated their subsidy policies and their changes. So governments are taking opportunities for change and to implement change for a more sustainable future. But that sort of sets the stage. But how does oil and gas industry, how do we strike this balance? And I think that's what we should be focusing on. We need to strike the balance. That there's the negative narrative all the time of the carbon emissions and greenhouse gases, but the good that the sector is doing to bridge those SDG goals and sustainable development gaps is not being spoken about at all. So does the oil sector have a role to play? Definitely. I don't think we can just simply wish away dirty energy because of the negative perception and the narrative around oil. So this balance has to be, we have to strike this balance for human development and inclusive growth if we're to achieve it. And we can do this by, two ways: by enhancing all the positive contributions and scaling up those positive contributions, but as well, we can also do it by mitigating all the negative impacts that oil and gas bring. And some of those positive contributions, I'll just list out a few, include, local content development. We can see a lot going on in that space. Economic development, capacity building. We have community engagement by the oil companies, anti-corruption initiatives, health and safety initiatives. I mean, and these translate not just to the oil sector, but even outside the oil sector. And so that is very, very important. But overall, it provides access to affordable energy, cheap, affordable, sustainable energy. Opportunities for employment it brings about. It brings about business skills and skills development in general, and again translated to other industries. Then for countries like ours that are dependent on oil and oil economies, we see increased fiscal revenues from oil and improved infrastructure. So without this, if we're chasing the development goals and sustainable development, we won't be able to achieve them at all. However, the industry also has contributed to the challenges that the SDGs are also trying to address, which is really climate change, environmental degradation, population displacement, things like armed conflicts in some cases, and sometimes economic and social inequality. And so what the industry should be doing is to try to mitigate these areas where there are challenges. And if they're able to do that, we'll be able to get closer to achieving the SDGs by 2030. So the oil and gas industry, as we see, is evolving. We see them embracing new technology. So technology is key. Innovation, digital innovation is coming, and we can see it in the sector being implemented all around to optimize production, maximizing recoveries and reserves. That's ongoing. So we're seeing a sustainable oil and gas industry kind of emerging. But we can't talk about energy at all if we don't speak about the role of gas in achieving sustainable development. It provides that alternative, achieving that affordable, reliable energy for all, and it's part of that energy mix that we can't ignore. We can see this graph, which I pulled from GCF, we can see that from changing from coal plants to gas plants, they reduced carbon emissions by about 40%. And we can see a lot of the major culprits, which is the US and China, all trying to reduce their carbon emissions by moving from coal to gas. So gas has a major role, and it's a quick win for them to reduce those carbon emissions. Africa, on the other hand, we produce very low carbon emissions because we don't use much energy, but we're far behind in terms of the SDG. So our focus should be more closing those gaps and not really on carbon emissions per se. And I think our policymakers need to take that into consideration, because we are not the polluters. We're actually, we need to catch up, really. I think in 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement had set the stage for this reduction in carbon emissions, and Nigeria signed up, and a lot of countries have signed up. So countries are facing now the challenge to reduce these CO2 emissions, transiting to cleaner energy, renewables, new technology, for full transition. This is what's going on at the moment. And it's very interesting to see the IOCs. We heard from Saudi Aramco just now, but the narrative is changing. The rhetorics are all different now. Early this year, we heard BP with their bold statements, saying that they have new policy, a new policy direction. So they said that they aim to have a different kind of energy company. They're going to reduce carbon emissions, and they're going to invest in low carbon oil and gas, or low carbon energy, which is renewables they're investing in. We see the same kind of rhetoric from people like Total and Royal Dutch Shell just a few months later. And this is 2020, and they're all saying that they're all moving towards to reach the net zero emissions by 2020. So that is coming. But at the same time, they're not saying, they're totally not going to do gas, but gas is part of that carbon mix. The same with Exxon, Chevron, and then Eni are looking at entering and going into nuclear fusion technology. So there's a lot going on in the renewable space, trying to catch up and meet that energy demand. But as we saw, the energy demand is going to continue to increase as we pull people out of poverty, especially in the emerging economies, such as the economies in Africa. So, but in trying to achieve a near zero energy economy, this requires not just the oil sector and the oil industry working. We actually need multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approaches, and not just companies, but also individuals. And more importantly, we need governments. They need to now provide robust policy frameworks, and they need to put in place the necessary action plans so that we can move towards the achieving this near zero economy. So I think in summary, I'd say the demand for energy will continue to rise. Natural gas supply remains the medium solution, if not even long-term, and very, very important in the energy mix. It can't be overlooked. The role of gas in reducing the carbon emissions has potential that needs to be tapped in replacing most of the coal plants. And then the industry needs to harness the positive aspects while they continue to mitigate the negative impact of emissions if we're to achieve sustainable development and meet those SDG goals in the next 9 years, because it's 2030. Oil and gas companies, so they need to find ways and these interlinkages with each of the 17 SDG goals to see how they can partner and collaborate with government, with community, civil society, etc., so that the industry can actually contribute positively to sustainable development. So I think I've come to the end of my own presentation. So thank you very much for listening, and it was a pleasure to be on this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Incidentally, I did have the presence of mind to have told her for how long to speak, but she did very well, coming in under 15 minutes, and that leaves us ample time. I would introduce the next panelist and hope he takes us about the same time as she did, so that we have enough time for questions and answers. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Chidi Ibe, Professor of Oceanography and the blue economy industry. She's an expert in energy, environment, and climate change. Please, let's welcome Professor Chidi Ibe.
Thank you very much, Professor Kekwe, for that kind of introduction. I'm honored to be part of this webinar, focusing on sustainable development and the role of petroleum in the post-COVID-19 era. I wish to thank the keynote speaker, Dr. Sami, for the very enlightening perspectives that he's opened up with. And I wish also to congratulate Patricia, who has given us a clarifying presentation on some of those concepts earlier elucidated by Dr. Sami. My role, as I understood it from the onset, was to devolve to the national level. We've had all the, we've seen the picture and listened to the imperatives at the global level. So now we come down to the national level. And I did 20 years in the service of the United Nations system. And one guiding principle that was always trumpeted was to think globally and act locally. And nobody epitomized that than the benefactor we're celebrating today, Dr. Emmanuel Egbogah. He was a global citizen, but when it came to action, he came down heavily on the side of nations. So you can talk about Malaysia, you can talk about Libya, you can talk about Indonesia, and his home country, Nigeria. So it is appropriate that having taught the global horizon, that we come down to the national level and the imperatives of petroleum, and I must say, through energy security in the post-COVID-19 era. And I love the song by Sami, where he said petroleum was relevant yesterday, is relevant today, and will be relevant in the post-COVID-19 era. So this is what this whole discussion is about. The interplay between the triggers, and there are three major sectors that provide the triggers that drive the world and human life, as we say. The social, which is the society, the environmental, essentially the environment that provides us, the environment that is the repository of most of the natural resources, including the energy resources, that then drive the economy. And so the different considerations that intertwine to give us a bearable life on Earth is what is anchored on sustainability. Once you arrive at an equilibrium between these forces, society, environment, and the economy, then you are on an even keel and you have brought prosperity to your folks. Now, let me give you takeaways from this presentation. And that is, the first one is that for sustainable development and the implied prosperity for humanity, including at the national level, in our case, any nation that needs to achieve this goal would necessarily go via energy security. You cannot divorce petroleum from energy security. Oil and gas considerations are the core of energy security. And of course, we know that energy was the driver of the Industrial Revolution, and not much has changed. It is still at the core of considerations in human activities, whether economic, whether social. And so another takeaway is that energy consumption per capita is one of the key indicators or benchmarks for measuring the standard of living of a people or nation. That's not surprising, given the centrality of energy in our lives, and particularly energy security in the scheme of things. Now, I'm always fascinated when governments change in this country and governors are talking about 6-point agenda, 11-point agenda. There's even a state that rolled out a 21-point agenda. And I'm saying, listen, these are pies in the sky. Focus on one which is so central and which is at the core of everything else, which is energy, and particularly energy security, and the rest will be added onto you. Because it is now evident, and the signs are everywhere, that every developed economy is built with the realization that a sustained availability of affordable energy in the various forms, and you can read that as energy security, is fundamental to the provision of jobs, food, health services, education, housing, clean water, good sanitation, in fact, the whole gamut of sustainable development goals. And you saw them in the earlier presentation, 17 of them. The centrality, the underpinning element in all this is energy security. Having said that, I wish to say that the road, because we are blessed with petroleum, that for Nigeria, the road to energy security and by implication to sustainable development, because I have established the nexus, and the implied prosperity runs through its petroleum resources. And well, it might be. And on 30th November 2018, I had the privilege of being the keynote speaker in a conference organized by the Nigerian Content Board in Port Harcourt. And they were like scoping the future, the next few decades, particularly in terms of research and development. And I faced a lot of questions when I talked about petroleum being around for the next 50 years and perhaps even more. And you saw that Sammy painted that same picture, clarified also by Patricia. And many people, there were so many questions from the audience. And they said, isn't this a contradiction about decarbonization and the move towards zero emissions and all that? And I said, no, because the first law of nature is self-preservation. What that means in banal terms is that you use what you have to get what you want or where you want to go. We have petroleum. That's what we're basing our development and sustainable development at that upon. And some people said, how about being signatory to Paris Climate Agreement of 2015? Wouldn't that abrogate our commitments? And I said, no. And I gave them the example that COP24 of climate change negotiations in 2018 took place in Katowice in Poland. And that's the coal use capital of the world. But they hosted the climate change conference. But they're still using what they have to get at what they want. And I can tell you as a retired United Nations technocrat and diplomat, that our emphasis in all these global agreements and conventions, the emphasis is not to achieve uniformity in terms of the goals or targets, but to look at commonalities. What remains sacrosanct are the goals and the targets. But we do recognize the specificities of countries, of nations, in the march towards those goals and targets. And they said, what about the move to renewable? Doesn't this sort of, go counter to that? And I said, no, indeed. It is desirable to have a healthy mix of renewables in your energy bucket for the nation. That's part of the concept of energy security. But make no mistakes about it. Even though even the oil companies are trumpeting, the move towards renewables, but the nature of international transport, the nature of military deployments will make petroleum relevant for a long future to come. And make no mistakes about it. Have no illusions that the world of renewables have a lot of technological hurdles to surmount before you can really think about basing your national economic growth entirely on renewables. If you take, for instance, the most potential areas of growth in renewables, the wind, the solar, they are non-dispatchable power, non-dispatchable energy sources. And that means that you need a whole transformation of transmission systems. You need a smart grid, and these things don't come cheap. It's not a walk in the park. So there are substantial, there are these off-grid applications and all that. Yes, you need that. But petroleum will still be the core. And you've had the last two speakers elucidate this particular point. Now, how about the keep the petroleum in the ground movement? Aren't you going to run counter to that? And I said, well, the movement, they said yes. I said, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they say. Because even for the IOCs, the international oil companies, as I mentioned, previously, even though they are trumpeting the move towards renewables as a big share of their business plans, in their boardrooms, they are busy formulating strategies and plans and debating them. They're looking at scenarios up to 2050 and beyond. So, are we going to fold our arms and look on because you signed some agreement? The answer is no. You rely on what you have to get where you're going. Now, we do have a problem, given that the centrality of petroleum in our national life, and I'm talking specifically of Nigeria, and in fact, most other places, but Nigeria, we find that that picture is studded with problems, a whole lot of problems, because Nigeria hit the 2 million barrels per day production mark in the 1970s. And today, the street urchin in Warri in Delta State will tell you same. We seem to be stuck. Looks like a case of arrested development. It's not that the ambitions had not been expressed by different administrations of going up to 4 million barrels per day, even 5, and it's doable. But we seem stuck on 2 million barrels. Did we choke? Is a pertinent question to pose. We seem to have all, relaxed, gotten back to our individual hamlets, pulled the resource control hats over our eyes, and singing the good old song, I bless the day I found you. And nothing seems to happen in terms of moving forward. Now, let's look at the way we are as an illustration of those hurdles which I've spoken about. Now, Ibe Kachukwu, before he left office, that was the Petroleum Minister of State, had from studies undertaken by experts within his ministry that at full blast, the nation would need 1.3 million barrels of crude per day in terms of refining needs. Today we're doing 450 barrels per day at 12% or less efficiency, operational use. Now you know the story. But if we were to take into account our needs of refined products, if we are to take into account our need of petroleum as feedstock for industrial development and all that, then we're talking 1.3 million barrels per day. And the question to ask in terms of our commitment as a member of the OPEC exporting country will have a downside allocation of about, it used to be 1.4, now it came down to 1.3 in the last 1 day or two. So what is left? If you use up 1.3 for refining needs, what is left to export? It means that we'll be in default in terms of our contracts to supply crude to our various clients overseas. Now, how about the other users? We're still importing almost the full gamut of refined products that we need for this economy. And here I would digress a little bit. I thought Chikezie will be here to applaud the model of Walter Smith Petroman, which is doing the integrated production and refining model. And that's the way to go, particularly for the so-called marginal fields. Now, how about petrochemicals? Almost everything you see around you, if you take a look, no matter where you are joining us from, almost anything you see around you has a bit of petroleum in it, if not all of petroleum in it. From your toothbrush, it ranges from your toothbrush through the chairs you're sitting on, the tables, to lipstick that our female guests are wearing. How about the methanol plants? So there is an urgent need to focus on more resources in terms of the oil and gas of this country. Now, Nigeria, even though it's more known for the production of oil, is in fact referred to among geologists as a gas province. It has more gas potential than oil. It's referred to a gas province with some oil. Now, that gas, as far as we know, in terms of the reserves, proven reserves, about 200 trillion scuff, standard cubic feet of gas. Now, what are we doing with that? We've launched gas to power in terms of our electricity projects, but we're terribly short. Do we have cooking gas for domestic purposes? There is the scope of natural gas to liquid petroleum gas, both for domestic as well as for fuel for our vehicles, etc. Today, the estimates, and these are well-informed estimates, that we need 5 billion scuff of gas, but we have only, we're doing 1.3 billion scarf. And still we're flaring gas. And there is an old maxim of waste not, want not. The annual cost of gas flares is 1.234 billion. And that's an underestimation by any chance. And so we go borrowing while we're burning resources. How about the jobs that could be generated? It's a whole lot, but we're missing out. We're talking about unemployment, we're talking about poverty. How about missing out on the broad gamut of environmental and human health gains that will come from the gas to power project? So we're on a bumpy road. Meantime, our needs are mounting. In terms of the oil and gas, let me summarize that they will be needed as feedstock to a vast array of manufacturing industries. Our unmet needs for petrochemicals threaten that prosperous future. It's almost like, you know, pie in the sky. So what do? Part of the way forward, we need more resources. Because if you ask the energy economists, they will tell you that energy sufficiency is at the core of energy security, which is at the core of sustainable development, which is at the core of prosperity for humanity. So we talk about enoughness. They define that sufficiently in economic terms and concept of enoughness. Then there is the issue of strategy, that today, when the Niger Delta coughs, we don't catch a cold. The nation doesn't catch a cold. The nation catches pneumonia. And whereas a cold, you know, the common flu would go away, pneumonia is potentially lethal any day. There's also the imperative to diversify the sources of our oil and gas. You know, that's part of the energy security. And this country, even though we're stuck on the easy road, which is the Niger Delta, where anywhere you punch, almost, you can close your eyes and punch a hole anywhere. You get oil, you get gas, you know. But this gas, I mean, this country in reality is floating on oil and gas. And this is no conjecture, and you need to read some of my past publications in this regard to know that because of the evolutionary history of the country, we have, you know, an embarrassment of riches in terms of oil and gas, including the offshore. So drill those wells. You know, I was sitting on a podium with the late Barrow as GMD, and I said, Sheikh Barrow, drill them wells and don't make a fanfare of them, drill them as routine, you know. And to emphasize here that government has no business in that process except supervisory and getting what should accrue to them as owners of the resources. The IOCs have boots on the ground, have comparative advantage, and you should leave that business for them. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, these are the petroliferous provinces. The darker shade of gray is the offshore, the lighter one, Nigeria, and the green points to the petroliferous provinces. When I gave a lecture back in 1987 to the then fledgling society, Nigerian Association of Petroleum Explorationists, NAPE, I pointed out to these basins. Today they are yielding oil. Then it looked like pie in the sky, you know, that they yielding the Anambra Basin, the Bida, and so on. The Borno Chad Basin. The Lumidin Basin, up in Sokoto, the Chinese were interested and did every arrangement with the government, and then NNPC said, who told you you can drill without us? We're in charge. and that died. So we need to revamp the policies and leave those who have comparative advantage to go on. And so that brings me in terms of, okay, you might say, show me the money. The money is, yes, please.
Can we round up in 3 minutes, please?
No, can I have 5 minutes? I'm almost there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, we need to jump down from the joint venture car, which we're riding at the moment, and mount the production sharing agreement horse, because the joint venture cash calls have been a bane to speedier development of new fields, oil and gas fields. We would have a savings of over 5 billion per year if you read the PIGB. You need to get off the argument of sovereignty because you own it. Wole Soyinka said, a tiger does not exhibit its tigritude. You need to focus on the risks, incentives, and rewards. You pump up the gravy, and the investors will come running. There are different models of this, from Indonesia to Peru, even to the Iranian buyback. Now, who is afraid of the PIB? In 2000, the Obasanjo regime introduced reforms. And thank goodness in 2008, Umaru Yar'Adua, president, attracted one of the giants, intellectual giants, and entrepreneurial colossus from the diaspora. His name is Egbogah, Emmanuel Egbogah. He lives forever. That's why I use the present to qualify him. Emmanuel Egbogah, and he put together the first PIB, the Petroleum Industry Bill. By 2018, finally, after 10 years of yo-yoing, it was passed as a draft, sent for assent, is still waiting. This bill, crafted and driven by Emmanuel Egbogah in 2018, encapsulates redeeming policies and strategies that will steer the petroleum industry to serve as an engine for sustainable development. It includes unbundling the NNPC along commercial lines, host community rejigging and all that, fiscal responsibility entity. Just look at Aramco, from where Sami, our guest speaker, comes, and you know that any national oil company that is run along a commercial basis has all the prospects of transforming the nation to prosperity. And this is my last slide, Mr. Chairman, and it's titled Ready, Steady, Go. The PIB is there still, broken down into 4 digestible parts. And so it's no use going to set up another committee, another study group, another think tank. Everything is in there. Some of our best brains have contributed to formulating the Petroleum Industry Bill in 4 parts. So I would say embrace the PIB and the crisis, the ding-dong, the yo-yoing, the flip-flopping within the oil industry, and everybody lives happily ever thereafter. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think that presentation has taken us back to where we started. We started at the global level. We talked our way down to the national level. And even within the context of that national level, we were taken back to the global with reference to the role that the IOCs can play and the reference to Aramco, the country of our lead speaker. I think I want to be sure that we do not have Mr. Chike. He did not show up, did he? It's not yet. Thank you. Then we go on to the questions and answers, and a number of those questions.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, sir, sorry to interrupt. Mr. Chike could not come because he had the meeting. It's not that he did not show up, but he couldn't come because he had a meeting with the Minister of Petroleum.
I stand corrected.
All right.
So we have a number of questions, and I would want to use my position as chairman of this panel to request, and to select some of them and request specific, the panelists to answer some of them specifically. If we take the first question, and I'm selecting this less because of its difficulty, but because for some reason, especially in this country and amongst our student population, there's a confusion whether China is a developed or developing country. And if you notice in the presentation, the keynote speaker, when he gave one of his slides, showed that China was one of the developing countries. And I would want him to please say a few words about why he would classify China as a developing country instead of as a developed country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, I think there are certain criteria and some KPIs and standards above which you may call a country as developed or developing, or sometimes even underdeveloped countries. I don't have those criteria in mind, but I think these are public domain information. I think you can Google it and find out. But for China, I mean, it's really, although it is possibly the second global economy nowadays, but you need to look at it per capita or per individual in terms of GDP, in terms of the infrastructure and the technology, not only in main cities like Beijing and Shanghai, but across the entire country. That would be my guess, basically, to answer this question. Looking at the country at a larger scale across the entire geographical area of that country, and averaging the GDP per capita on the number of population, possibly that's why a country like China is still considered to be developing country.
All right. Thank you very much. The next question, I'd like one of our panelists, and I will refer this to Professor Ibe, to consider, please, because your presentation, you touched on the critical importance of energy sufficiency for sustainable development. That question is the one from Loki Odokuma. How does the reliance on oil and gas result to a greener and cleaner environment, considering the volume of emissions from its utilization? Prof. Sibe, please.
Yeah, it's not a contradiction, particularly if you consider the present and future emphasis on gas. Gas is the less polluting fuel compared to oil. And so the movement globally now is towards gas to power projects, gas to fertilizers, gas to a whole gamut of industrial manufacturing enterprises. So this is recognized even in the climate change agreement as an intermediate fuel as we move towards low carbon economy and greener economy. Look, agriculture, as innocent as it seems, and in fact is presented as a victim, but agriculture actually contributes about 20% of the global CO2 and methane burden, and so complicates the climate change debate. Would you counsel agriculture? The answer is no, because you need food security. The same issue is on the table in terms of oil and gas. Now, the oil part of the petroleum, can move to feedstock for a whole variety of things, the petrochemicals. They will never run out of things to do with oil. Whereas you focus on gas as a cleaner fuel that moves our economy towards a greener economy, towards the zero emission mark. Of course, we argued while in the United Nations about this concept is the zero emission effects, that the more rational target is the low carbon economy. You minimize to the extent possible, but gas, which is petroleum, affords us advantage fuel for present and the post-COVID future.
Thank you, Professor Ibe. There's a question from Fidelis Remark on corruption and sustainable development. That question specifically is, how do we overcome the issue of the effect of corruption in order to strike the needed balance in the use of energy resources and the effect on the environment? And I would like to invite Patricia Hart to please guide us on that question.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the questions that are coming in. I think when it comes to corruption, and I'm not going to go on and on, I think it's corruption has always been overflogged, and it's in the clearly in the oil sector. But I think first and foremost, to fight corruption, there has to be political will at the highest level. That's number one. You must have that to fight corruption. And then you also have to have strong institutions. That's the second thing you have to have. And you have to have in place those strong institutions. Another thing you have to have a strong judicial system. I think if you have those three in place with your strong processes and systems, corruption will be reduced substantially. Some transparent processes and systems within the environment that you work in. So I think yes, it's one way we can fight corruption, but it has to come from the highest level for it to be impactful. Thank you.
All right, I think that's the last question we'll take. There's a few more, but I'm sure that our listeners who send them in would have gotten quite some rich responses from the panelists. And I want to hand over to Professor Ledare for the closing processes. Professor Ledare, please.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the panelists again for a job well done. I want to thank Professor Ibe. I know there's so much more you could have said, but we'll find a way to get you to have opportunity to expand on those ideas. Before we go to the closing remark from the Vice Chancellor, please permit me to invite the patriarch of the Egbogah family for a brief remark, Madam Chirota Ngozi Egbogah. Over to you, Ma, if you can unmute. I know she's on the. Yeah. Ma'am, please, could you unmute so that we can hear you?
Yes, I did.
Okay,
yeah.
ma'am. Go ahead, ma'am.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Can you
please.
hear me? Good. Hello, everyone. We, the family of Dr. E, as he's fondly called, would like to take the time sincerely to thank all the people who have been working conscientiously to uphold and sustain the legacy of our beloved husband and father. We quite appreciate the effort that goes into these events. We are quite overwhelmed that in spite of the hurdles that we are putting your way, you were unstoppable. Despite COVID-19 being a big disruptor and deterrent of many events, we resorted to keeping the seminar alive online. This method probably attracts a larger audience, allowing people to participate from different parts of the world and different time zones. Our special thanks goes to the new Vice Chancellor of University of Port Harcourt, Professor Stephen Okududu, and the keynote speaker, Dr. Sami, 2019 SPE President and Manager of Saudi Aramco Petroleum Engineering Application Services Department. We would also like to thank all the panelists of the 2020 Legacy series and the previous one. I can say that we're really very impressed with all the speakers. You are awesome. We finally thank all the participants who have taken some time off to log in. We thank you all for keeping the legacy of our Dr. E alive. He will be smiling as we all participate in the gift of education and knowledge. Something we all know he was incredibly passionate about. He will go extra mile to make sure that everyone around him that has the potential goes to school. Once more, I will have talked more, giving examples of his generosity to a lot of people that have the potential to go to school, but didn't have the money. But I'll keep it brief. I thank you all for keeping his legacy alive, because this is the only way I know he would like to be remembered. May God bless you all, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for staying awake to participate in Legacy. It's really a pleasure to have you. Let me now invite the Vice Chancellor of the University of Port Harcourt to give a closing remark. Professor Steve Okududu.
Thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had a very, enlightening session, right from the presentation by Dr. Sami, through the intervention of Simon Hart, and that of Professor Ibe. Quite revealing in all of its entirety, focusing on issues on sustainable development, particularly from the point of view of the utilization of petroleum resources. I'd just like to say that petroleum had posed quite a lot of challenges. Just like Dr. Sami said, the major challenges ranging from technical to geopolitical, the economic, and of course, the environmental challenges. And just when we thought we couldn't have enough of that, there was the COVID-19 pandemic that hit the world. And of course, that altered the entire equation in terms of what the world was facing as part of those challenges. I think what we can take away from this presentation, without duly belaboring the points that have already been made, is that the focus on sustainability is that there is the lesson and the telling need to utilize petroleum resources in a very sustainable way. That way, we do not, in the course of wanting to sustain our economy and of course drive development, mortgage the sustainable development of future generation. I think that is a lesson we have to take away from here. It was rightly said here that there is a need to move away from the use of fossil fuel entirely, and those are those who are advocating keeping the oil in the ground, to those who are, making, this suggestion for the maximum and increased use of gas resources. But
I can say at this point in time that while other countries have various levels of the utilization and safe and sustainable use of their petroleum resources, we in Africa, particularly in Nigeria, appears to have had a hard hit from the poor utilization of our petroleum resources. Of course, the point to make here is that we can take the latecomers advantage in terms of what other countries are doing to mitigate the deleterious effect, of the utilization or poor use of sustainable, petroleum resources. It's on this note, I want to thank everybody, beginning from Dr. Ami, Simon Hart, Professor Ibe, and the moderator of the session, Professor Egbogah, the Egbogah chair, Professor Joseph Ajenka, and of course, my dear friend here, Professor Emmanuel, and the Dean, Faculty of Engineering, Professor Joel, and all of you listening to this program from wherever you are all over the world. Thank you very much, and do have a pleasant day.
Again, I want to thank you, and I will invite the Vice Chairman of the Emmanuel Egbogah Foundation, Professor Joseph Ajenka, to again re-echo Madam Chirota's affirmation of appreciation for your support. And of course, briefly, I want to thank our project manager, Dr. Susan Fubara, who is actually the engineer behind this. Professor Ajenka, over to you, sir.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank Madam Egbogah. She had already done the vote of thanks. The Vice Chancellor has also done the vote of thanks. But like Professor Wumi said, we'd like to thank all those who work behind the scene. Susan, Uduma, my secretary, and then the computer people in the World Bank. Quite a number of people have worked behind the scene to ensure that everything is done properly and that we have had a good time in organizing this event. As part of our plan, the foundation is going to propagate some of the legacies of Dr. E. One of the things we want to do is to ensure, Professor Wumi had already volunteered to speak to final year students in petroleum engineering on petroleum economy. That will be a webinar lecture series. We're also working with Nnamdi Azikiwe University, Awka, to organize the roundtable on the budget. We're also working with UI, University of Ibadan, SP chapter, to organize a Emmanuel Egbogah lecture there. And more importantly, we are working towards what Dr. E promised to do at the University of Port Harcourt University Foundation when we had a meeting on the board to organize a training on university advancement for various universities to build capacity in fundraising and fund management. That is like teaching somebody how to fish and not just giving somebody fish so that people can be self-reliant and do things for themselves. So we'd like to thank everybody for participating and thank all those who have worked with us behind the scene to ensure that we had a very good time. The Vice Chancellor in particular would like to thank you for your very busy schedule and making our time to attend this event. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Au revoir. Bless you. The network is closed. Well, we make it again.